I never thought a February snowstorm in suburban Minneapolis, Minnesota would turn my life into a legal battlefield. But that's exactly what happened the day Sharon Grayson knocked on my door with a manila folder full of accusations and a smile that could curdle milk. It was a Tuesday morning when I heard the sharp rap on my front door. I'd been working from home, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. My golden retriever, Max, lifted his head from his bed in the corner, ears perked. I figured it was a package delivery, but when I opened the door, there stood Sharon Grayson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, wrapped in a pristine white wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Warren Jenkins," she said, not as a greeting but as an accusation. "We need to talk about your flagrant violation of HOA regulations." I blinked at her, still holding my coffee mug. "Good morning to you too, Sharon." She didn't acknowledge my attempt at civility. Instead, she thrust the manila folder toward me. "I've documented 17 instances of pet waste violations on your property over the past 3 weeks. This is completely unacceptable." I took the folder, genuinely confused. Pet waste violations. "Sharon, there's 2 feet of snow covering everything right now. How could you possibly—" "I have my methods," she interrupted, her thin lips pressing into a line. "The snow is melting along the edges of properties, and I've been conducting daily inspections. Your yard has shown clear evidence of dog waste that was not properly disposed of before the snowfall. According to HOA bylaws, Section 4.7, Paragraph B, all pet owners must immediately clean up after their animals, regardless of weather conditions." I felt my jaw tighten. Sharon had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made it her personal mission to fine, harass, and generally make miserable anyone who didn't maintain their property to her exacting standards. She'd sent violation notices to elderly Mrs. Patterson for having her trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours on collection day. She'd fined the Rodriguez family for painting their mailbox a shade of blue that was, according to her, not on the approved color palette. She'd even tried to ban holiday decorations after Thanksgiving because they were visually cluttering the neighborhood aesthetic. "Sharon, I always clean up after Max," I said, keeping my voice level. "I have bags in my pocket every time I take him out. If there's waste in my yard, it's probably from other animals passing through." "Other animals," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mr. Jenkins, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. I know every pet, every owner, and every excuse. Your dog, your responsibility." The fines detailed in that folder total $850. "Payment is due within 30 days, or we'll place a lien on your property." My hand tightened around the folder. "You're fining me $850 for dog waste you claim is under 2 feet of snow." "Was under snow," she corrected. "As I said, the edges are melting. The evidence is clear. I've taken photographs, which you'll find in the documentation." I flipped open the folder. Sure enough, there were printed photos of what might have been dog waste at the very edges of snow banks. The images were grainy, taken from a distance, and honestly could have been anything: mud, leaves, actual waste. There was no way to definitively say it came from my dog, or that it was even on my property given the angle of the shots. "This is ridiculous," I said. "These photos don't prove anything." Sharon's expression hardened. "I'll see you at the HOA meeting next Thursday, Mr. Jenkins. If you wish to appeal these fines, you may present your case to the board. Good day." She turned on her heel and walked back down my driveway, her boots crunching in the snow. I watched her go, feeling my blood pressure rising. Max had come to stand beside me, and I reached down to scratch behind his ears. "We're in trouble, buddy," I muttered. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Sharon's accusations. I'd bought my house in Meadowbrook Hills 4 years ago, drawn by the quiet streets, good schools in the area for the future, and the sense of community. The HOA fees seemed reasonable at the time, and I'd naively thought the association existed to maintain common areas and organize the occasional neighborhood event. I hadn't realized I was signing up to live under Sharon Grayson's personal dictatorship. I did some research on HOA laws in Minnesota. Turned out, homeowners associations had significant power, including the ability to fine residents and place liens on properties for unpaid fines. However, they also had to follow their own bylaws and provide due process. I pulled out my copy of the HOA Covenant Conditions and Restrictions, that thick document I'd barely skimmed when I closed on the house, and started reading. Section 4.7, Paragraph B did indeed state that pet owners must immediately clean up after their animals. But it also required clear photographic or video evidence with date and time stamps for any violation claims. Looking at Sharon's photos again, I noticed none of them had visible date stamps, and the angles made it impossible to definitively identify the waste or its location. I also found something interesting in Section 12.3. Board members were required to act in good faith and without personal bias when enforcing regulations. They were specifically prohibited from selective enforcement or targeting individual homeowners. I started keeping a log. Every time I took Max out, I noted the time, location, and confirmed that I'd cleaned up after him. I also started paying closer attention to Sharon's own property, which was 3 houses down from mine on the same street. She had a small white dog, some kind of designer breed that she walked twice daily. I'd seen her around the neighborhood with it, but never paid much attention. On Saturday morning, I was up early, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered street in shades of pink and gold. Max needed his morning walk, so I bundled up and grabbed his leash. As we stepped outside, I saw Sharon about a block away, walking her dog. I decided to take the same route, keeping a reasonable distance behind her. Sharon's dog, which I'd heard her call Precious on previous occasions, was a small fluffy thing that pranced through the snow like it was personally offended by the cold. Sharon walked with her phone in hand, scrolling through something, paying minimal attention to her pet. When Precious stopped to sniff near a neighbor's mailbox, I slowed my pace, watching. The little dog circled twice, then squatted. Sharon kept walking, tugging the leash slightly but not stopping. She never looked back, never reached for a waste bag, just continued down the sidewalk with Precious trotting to catch up. I stood there, stunned. Sharon Grayson, the HOA president who just fined me $850 for alleged pet waste violations, had just let her own dog defecate on someone else's property without cleaning it up. The irony was almost too perfect, except it made me furious instead of amused. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the waste Precious had left behind, making sure to capture the location near the mailbox. I noted the time and even took a video showing Sharon walking away down the street with her dog, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I had a better idea. Over the next week, I watched Sharon's routine carefully. She walked Precious every morning around 7 and every evening around 5:30. I started documenting her walks, keeping my distance but maintaining visual contact. In 6 days, I witnessed her dog leave waste on neighborhood properties 4 times. Sharon cleaned up exactly 0 of those instances. I photographed everything, making sure each image clearly showed the waste, the location with identifying landmarks like house numbers or distinctive features, and Sharon in the frame or clearly walking away. I created timestamps on each photo and backed everything up to cloud storage. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7, held in the community clubhouse near the neighborhood entrance. I'd never attended one before, despite living in Meadowbrook Hills for 4 years. I'd received the monthly newsletters and paid my dues, but I'd never had a reason to get involved with the actual politics of the association. Walking into that clubhouse, I felt like I was entering enemy territory. The space was a large room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front. Sharon sat at the center of that table, flanked by the other board members. Robert Chen, the vice president and a semi-retired accountant, Deborah Morris, the treasurer and a real estate agent, and Frank Sullivan, the secretary and a middle school teacher. About 20 other homeowners were scattered among the folding chairs. I recognized most of them by sight, neighbors I'd waved to over the years but never really talked to beyond brief pleasantries. I took a seat in the third row, my folder of evidence tucked under my arm. Sharon called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. She went through the standard agenda items: approval of last month's minutes, financial report, update on landscaping contracts for the common areas. Her voice had that practiced authority of someone who loved being in charge, every word precisely enunciated. Finally, she reached the enforcement section of the agenda. "We have several violation appeals to address this evening," she announced, looking down at her papers. "First, we have Warren Jenkins, who has appealed fines totaling $850 for repeated pet waste violations." She said my name like it tasted bad. I stood up, gathering my folder. "Mr. Jenkins, you have 5 minutes to present your case," Sharon said, glancing at the clock on the wall. I walked to the front of the room, very aware of everyone's eyes on me. "Thank you, Madam President. I'm appealing these fines on several grounds. First, the photographic evidence provided doesn't meet the standards outlined in our HOA bylaws. Section 4.7 requires clear photos with date and time stamps. The images I received have neither." I pulled out Sharon's photos and held them up. "Second, these images don't definitively show that the waste in question is on my property or came from my dog. The angles are ambiguous at best." Sharon interrupted. "Mr. Jenkins, I personally witnessed the boundaries of your property and can confirm I'm not finished," I said firmly, and I saw her eyes widen slightly at being cut off. "Third, and most importantly, I have evidence that demonstrates selective enforcement by the HOA president." That got the room's attention. I could feel the shift in energy, people sitting up straighter. I opened my folder and pulled out my documentation. Over the past week, I've observed and photographed the HOA president's own dog leaving waste on neighborhood properties on multiple occasions without any cleanup. I have dated, time-stamped photos and video evidence of 4 separate violations. The room erupted in murmurs. I saw several people lean forward, craning to see what I was holding. Sharon's face had gone pale, then flushed dark red. That's preposterous," she sputtered. "This is clearly a retaliatory fabrication." "Is it?" I walked over to the board table and laid out my photos in a row. "This is Monday morning, February 17th, at 7:14 a.m., near 445 Meadowbrook Lane. That's the Hendersons' mailbox. This is Tuesday evening, February 18th, at 5:32 p.m., near the corner of Meadowbrook and Oak Street. This is Thursday morning, February 20th, at 7:09 a.m. Enough." Sharon's voice cracked like a whip. "This is completely inappropriate. You're disrupting the proceedings with unfounded accusations." Robert Chen, the vice president, reached for the photos. "May I see those?" I handed them over. He examined them carefully, his expression neutral but intent. Deborah Morris leaned over to look as well, and I saw her eyebrows rise. Frank Sullivan pushed his glasses up his nose and studied the images. "These appear to be genuine photographs," Robert said slowly. "And the subject does appear to be. Sharon, is this your dog?" "This is a witch hunt," Sharon said, her voice rising. "Mr. Jenkins is clearly trying to deflect from his own violations by making wild accusations. I move that we reject his appeal and uphold the fines." "I second the motion," Deborah said quickly, but she looked uncomfortable. "Wait a minute," said a voice from the audience. I turned to see Bill Henderson standing up, a burly man in his 60s with gray hair and a flannel shirt. "That's my mailbox in that first picture. And yeah, I've been finding dog mess near it pretty regularly." I assumed it was from the Parkers' dog since they walk past there, but if it's actually from the HOA president's dog. "This is absurd," Sharon said. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "I always clean up after Precious. Always." "These photos are taken out of context or manipulated somehow." "I also have video," I said quietly. "Would you like me to play it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sharon stared at me, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was trapped, and she knew it. Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this discussion and investigate both matters more thoroughly before making any decisions." "No," I said. "I want this resolved tonight. I want the fines dropped, and I want it on record that the HOA president has been engaging in selective enforcement." "You can't make demands of this board," Sharon snapped. "Actually, according to Section 12.3 of our bylaws, I can request a full board vote on any enforcement action. And board members who have a conflict of interest are required to recuse themselves." I looked directly at Sharon. "You have a conflict of interest here, Miss Grayson. You're accused of the same violations you're trying to fine me for." Frank Sullivan spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. "He's right. The bylaws are explicit about conflicts of interest." Sharon looked around the table, seeing her support crumbling. "This is my neighborhood," she said, and her voice had a desperate edge now. "I've dedicated years to maintaining standards, to keeping property values high, to making sure people follow the rules. And this is the thanks I get. Some new resident with a vendetta trying to undermine everything I've built." "I've lived here for 4 years," I pointed out. "And I'm not trying to undermine anything. I'm just asking that the rules apply equally to everyone, including you." Another voice from the audience. "I'd like to hear more about this selective enforcement." It was Janet Porter, a woman I'd occasionally chatted with at the neighborhood mailbox cluster. "My husband and I got fined $300 last month because our trash bins were visible from the street on a non-collection day. But they were only out because the collection truck missed our street that week, and we were told to leave them out. Meanwhile, I've noticed that some board members' properties seem to get a pass on violations." "That's not true," Deborah Morris said, but she wouldn't meet Janet's eyes. "Really?" Janet pulled out her phone. "Because I've got photos too. Sharon, your house had Christmas lights up until February 3rd. The bylaws say all holiday decorations must be removed by January 15th. That's a violation right there. But I didn't see you fining yourself." The meeting was dissolving into chaos. Multiple homeowners were standing now, voicing their own grievances about selective enforcement, excessive fines, and Sharon's authoritarian approach to HOA management. I stood to the side and watched it all unfold, feeling a mix of vindication and something almost like pity. Sharon had built her identity around controlling this neighborhood, and it was crumbling in real time. Robert Chen was banging his own gavel, trying to restore order. "Everyone, please. We need to handle this systematically. Let's take a vote on Mr. Jenkins' appeal first." "I recuse myself," Sharon said stiffly. She stood up from the table and walked to an empty chair in the front row, sitting with her back rigid and her hands folded in her lap. With Sharon recused, the remaining 3 board members conferred quietly. The vote was unanimous. My fines were dropped. Robert Chen also proposed that the board would commission an independent review of all enforcement actions from the past year to ensure consistency and fairness. That vote also passed, but the meeting wasn't over. Bill Henderson stood up and said, "I'd like to propose a vote of no confidence in Sharon Grayson as HOA president." The room went silent. Sharon's head snapped up, her eyes wide. We don't have a mechanism for that," she stammered. Frank Sullivan was flipping through his copy of the bylaws. "Actually, we do. Section 13.8 allows for the removal of any board member by a vote of the homeowners, provided there's a quorum present and a 2/3 majority in favor." "We have 23 homeowners here," Robert noted, checking the sign and sheet. "That's well over the required quorum of 20%. What followed was a tense, uncomfortable discussion. More homeowners shared stories of Sharon's overreach, her excessive fines, her confrontational approach. Some people defended her, pointing out that she'd volunteered countless hours and that the neighborhood was well maintained. But the tide was clearly against her. When the vote was finally called, it was 18-5 in favor of removing Sharon from the board presidency. Sharon stood up slowly. Her face was ashen, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're all making a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "Without proper oversight, this neighborhood will fall apart. Property values will plummet. Standards will disappear. You'll see." She grabbed her coat and her papers and walked out of the clubhouse, the door slamming behind her with a resounding thud. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Robert Chen agreed to serve as interim president until a special election could be held. They established a committee to review the HOA bylaws and recommend revisions to prevent future abuses of power. I was asked to join that committee, and despite my exhaustion, I agreed. When I finally got home that night, it was past 10. Max greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging, completely unaware that he'd been at the center of a neighborhood political drama. I gave him extra treats and collapsed on my couch. I thought that would be the end of it. Sharon had been removed from power, my fines were dropped, and reforms were in the works. I figured Sharon would lay low for a while, lick her wounds, and eventually either accept the new reality or move to a different neighborhood where she could start fresh. I was wrong. 2 days after the meeting, I woke up to find my car tires slashed. All 4 of them, clean cuts that left the tires completely deflated. I stood in my driveway in my pajamas and winter coat, staring at the damage, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I called the police. An officer arrived within 20 minutes, a young woman named Officer Martinez who took photos and filed a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked. I hesitated. I had suspicions but no proof. "There's been some tension with the HOA," I said carefully. "I recently appealed some fines, and the president was removed from the board as a result, but I don't want to accuse anyone without evidence." Officer Martinez wrote down the information. "We'll keep an eye on the area," she said. "And you might want to consider installing a security camera if you don't already have one." I took her advice. That afternoon, I went to a home electronics store and bought a comprehensive security system. Cameras for the front door, driveway, and backyard, all with night vision and motion detection, uploading footage to cloud storage. The installation took most of the day, but by evening my property was covered. Good thing I did, too, because 3 nights later the cameras caught someone creeping around my front yard at 2 in the morning. I was asleep when the motion alert pinged my phone. I grabbed it groggily, squinting at the bright screen, and saw the notification from my security app. Opening the live feed, I watched a figure in dark clothing and a hood moving across my front lawn. They were carrying something, a bag or container. I was out of bed instantly, heart pounding. I pulled on jeans and a hoodie, shoved my feet into boots, and grabbed my phone. I could see on the camera feed that the person was now crouched near my mailbox, doing something I couldn't quite make out. I called 911 as I headed downstairs. "There's someone trespassing on my property," I told the dispatcher, giving my address. "I have video surveillance showing them in my front yard right now." "Stay inside, sir," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are on the way," but I couldn't just wait. I turned on my front porch light and threw open the door. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The figure jerked upright and ran. They sprinted down the street, disappearing into the darkness between streetlights. I didn't chase them, I'm not stupid, but I did walk over to my mailbox to see what they'd been doing. There, scattered across my lawn, was dog waste. Lots of it. Someone had collected dog feces and was spreading it on my property. I stood there, simultaneously disgusted and furious, when I heard the sirens approaching. 2 police cars pulled up and 3 officers emerged. One of them was Officer Martinez, who'd taken the report about my tires. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, recognizing me, "you called about a trespasser." I explained what I'd seen, and we reviewed the security footage together on my phone. The video clearly showed someone in dark clothing spreading waste on my lawn, though the person's face wasn't visible due to the hood and the angle. "I need to download this footage," Officer Martinez said. "This is harassment, possibly vandalism. Combined with the tire slashing, we're looking at a pattern of behavior." Another officer was examining the waste with a flashlight. "Looks like dog feces, like you said. Someone went to a lot of trouble for this. You really must have made someone angry." I thought about Sharon, about the humiliation she'd suffered at the HOA meeting. "I might know who," I said, "but I need to be sure before I make an accusation." Over the next week, I kept my security footage running and made a point of varying my schedule. I'd leave the house at different times, come back at odd hours, trying to be unpredictable. Max's walks became strategic operations. I'd scan the street before stepping outside, and I always had my phone ready to document anything unusual. Sharon, meanwhile, had gone from queen of the neighborhood to persona non grata. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that several homeowners had confronted her about past fines they considered unfair and were demanding refunds. The new interim board was reviewing all her enforcement actions, and rumors were flying about potential improprieties in how HOA funds had been spent during her tenure. I saw her occasionally, usually getting her mail or walking Precious. She never looked in my direction, never acknowledged my existence, but I could feel the anger radiating from her like heat from asphalt in summer. Then, on a Sunday morning, my cameras caught something interesting. At 6:47 a.m., while I was still asleep, Sharon walked past my house with Precious. The dog stopped at the edge of my lawn, and I watched the footage later showing Sharon glancing around before letting Precious defecate on my property. She didn't clean it up, just tugged the leash and continued walking. I saved the footage and added it to my growing collection of evidence. But I still didn't have proof that Sharon was behind the tire slashing or the middle of the night waste dumping. That proof came a week later, in the most unexpected way. I was at the grocery store on a Wednesday evening, loading bags into my trunk, when I heard a familiar voice from the next aisle of parking spaces. "Teach that arrogant bastard a lesson. He thinks he's so clever with his cameras and his evidence." I froze, listening. It was definitely Sharon's voice. "Mom, you need to let this go," another woman's voice replied, younger, exasperated. "You're going to get yourself in trouble. What you did to his tires was exactly what he deserved," Sharon interrupted. "And spreading dog mess on his precious lawn." Poetic justice. He tried to humiliate me with photos of Precious, so I gave him exactly what he accused me of. "You're admitting to vandalism and trespassing. What if he has you on camera?" "He doesn't. I wore dark clothes and a hood and I went in the middle of the night. There's no proof." I pulled out my phone and started a voice recording app, holding it up slightly above the edge of the car that separated us. My hands were shaking with adrenaline. The younger woman, Sharon's daughter, apparently sighed deeply. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You're obsessed with this guy. You drive past his house multiple times a day. You talk about him constantly. This isn't healthy." "He destroyed everything I built," Sharon said, and her voice cracked. "That neighborhood was mine. I made it what it is. I enforced standards when no one else would. And he took it all away with his lies and his manipulations." "They weren't lies, Mom. You did let Precious poop without cleaning it up. I've seen you do it. And those fines you were giving people were excessive. The whole neighborhood was afraid of you." "They respected me," Sharon corrected sharply. "No, they feared you. There's a difference." There was a long silence. Then Sharon said in a quieter, more dangerous voice, "I'm not done with Warren Jenkins, not by a long shot. He wants to play games with evidence. I'll show him evidence. I'll make his life so miserable he'll beg to move out of Meadowbrook Hills." "Mom, stop, please. You're scaring me. Go home, Lindsay. I need to run some errands." I heard a car door slam, then an engine start. I risked a peek over the trunk of my car and saw a silver sedan pulling away Sharon's daughter, presumably. Sharon was still standing there, loading groceries into her white Mercedes SUV, her movements sharp and angry. I stopped the recording and immediately saved it to cloud storage. Then I sat in my car for a long moment, processing what I'd just heard. Sharon had confessed to slashing my tires and vandalizing my property. She'd also made what could arguably be construed as a threat. I drove straight to the police station. Officer Martinez wasn't on duty, but I asked to speak with someone about my ongoing harassment case. A detective named Thompson met with me, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a tired expression. I played him the recording. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as Sharon's words played out. "You recorded this where?" he asked. "In the parking lot of the grocery store on Elmwood Avenue. I was loading my car and I overheard them talking in the next parking row. I recorded it because I recognized her voice, and she was confessing to the crimes against my property." Detective Thompson leaned back in his chair. "This is good evidence, but we need to corroborate it with your security footage and establish a clear timeline. Walk me through everything that's happened, starting from the beginning." I spent the next hour giving a detailed statement. Detective Thompson took notes, asked questions, and reviewed all the evidence I'd collected. The security footage of my tires being slashed, the video of someone spreading dog waste on my lawn in the middle of the night, the recording of Sharon's confession, and even the original dispute over dog waste violations and the HOA meeting. "This paints a clear picture of escalating harassment," Detective Thompson said. "The confession is particularly damning. Combined with your security footage, we have enough for criminal trespassing, vandalism, and potentially stalking charges given the pattern of behavior. What happens now?" I asked. I'll review all the evidence with the prosecutor's office. Assuming they agree there's sufficient cause, we'll obtain a warrant for Miss Grayson's arrest. Given that she's not a flight risk and these are non-violent offenses, she'll likely be arrested and released on bail pending trial. But Mr. Jenkins, I have to warn you this could get worse before it gets better. If she's genuinely obsessed, as her daughter suggested, she might escalate further. What should I do? Keep your security system running. Document everything. Don't engage with her directly. If she approaches you or comes onto your property, call 911 immediately. We'll also request a restraining order as part of the arrest warrant. I left the police station feeling oddly detached, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a regular guy living a quiet life in a suburban neighborhood. Now, I was at the center of criminal charges against my former HOA president. The arrest happened 2 days later, on a Friday morning. I only knew about it because Detective Thompson called to inform me. Sharon Grayson was arrested at her home at 8:30 this morning, he said. She's been charged with criminal trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. A temporary restraining order has been issued requiring her to stay at least 500 feet away from you and your property. She posted bail and was released an hour ago. How did she react? I asked. About as well as you'd expect. She insisted this was a setup, that you're orchestrating the whole thing to get revenge for the HOA violations. Her attorney advised her to stop talking, but she didn't take that advice particularly well. That afternoon, I got a call from Robert Chen, the interim HOA president. Warren, I heard about Sharon's arrest. This is just I don't even know what to say. The board wants you to know that we fully support you and we're horrified that this happened. We're also going to recommend a full audit of HOA finances during Sharon's tenure, because if she was willing to commit these crimes, we need to make sure there weren't other improprieties. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate that. Also, between you and me, Sharon's husband contacted me. Apparently, he's filing for divorce. He says he didn't know about any of this and he's mortified. The whole situation is just sad, really. It was sad. Somewhere along the way, Sharon had become so invested in controlling the neighborhood that she'd lost all perspective. The power she wielded as HOA president had twisted into something toxic, and when that power was taken away, she'd unraveled completely. The restraining order didn't stop her, though. 3 days after her arrest, my security cameras caught her driving slowly past my house at midnight. She didn't stop, didn't get out, but the fact that she was violating a court order was enough. I called Detective Thompson, sent him the footage, and Sharon was arrested again the next morning for violating the restraining order. This time, the judge didn't grant bail so easily. At the hearing, which I attended, the prosecutor argued that Sharon had demonstrated a pattern of escalating behavior and a disregard for court orders. The judge agreed and set bail at $25,000 with GPS monitoring as a condition of release. Sharon's attorney argued that his client was a respected member of the community with no prior criminal record, that she was under severe emotional distress due to her divorce and the loss of her position in the HOA, and that she deserved leniency. The judge was unmoved. Miss Grayson, you've been given multiple opportunities to cease your harassment of Mr. Jenkins. You've violated a restraining order within days of it being issued. The court takes these violations very seriously. Bail is set at $25,000. GPS monitoring is mandatory, and you are ordered to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Mr. Jenkins. If you violate this order again, I will remand you to custody pending trial. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Sharon said quietly. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than the imperious woman who'd knocked on my door with a folder full of accusations. As we filed out of the courtroom, Sharon's daughter Lindsay, I'd learned, approached me in the hallway. "Mr. Jenkins, can I talk to you for a minute?" I was wary, but she looked genuinely upset, so I agreed. We stepped away from the crowd to a quieter corner. "I just want to apologize for my mother's behavior," Lindsay said. She's never been like this before. The HOA presidency became an obsession for her. My dad and I tried to get her to step back to get some perspective, but she wouldn't listen. And when she lost that position, it was like she lost her identity. "I'm not excusing what she did," she added quickly, "but I wanted you to know that this isn't who she really is. Or at least, it's not who she used to be." "I appreciate you telling me that," I said carefully, "but your mother committed multiple crimes against me. She slashed my tires, vandalized my property, harassed me, and violated a restraining order. I can't just let that go because she's having an identity crisis. I know, I understand. I hope she gets help, real help. She needs therapy, not just legal consequences." "Maybe she'll get both," I said, not unkindly. "Sometimes consequences are what force people to get the help they need." The case took months to wind through the legal system. Sharon's attorney tried multiple times to get the charges reduced or dismissed, arguing everything from mental health issues to claiming I'd provoked her with my initial appeal of the HOA fines. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too documented. The HOA audit that Robert Chen had commissioned came back with some interesting findings. While there wasn't evidence of outright theft, Sharon had been unusually aggressive in assessing fines, generating over $40,000 in violation penalties over 3 years, far more than any previous HOA president. Much of that money had gone toward projects she'd personally championed, including excessive landscaping upgrades and a complete renovation of the clubhouse that hadn't been approved by a homeowner vote as required by the bylaws. The board issued a statement offering to review and potentially refund fines that had been improperly assessed. Dozens of homeowners came forward with complaints. It turned out Sharon's crusade against me wasn't unique. She'd targeted numerous residents over minor or questionable violations, creating an atmosphere of fear and resentment throughout the neighborhood. In June, Sharon's case finally went to trial. I testified about the initial dog waste dispute, the HOA meeting, and the subsequent harassment. The security footage was played for the jury, showing the figure in dark clothing vandalizing my property. The audio recording of Sharon's confession to her daughter was admitted as evidence, despite objections from the defense. Sharon took the stand in her own defense, which her attorney later probably regretted. She tried to portray herself as a dedicated volunteer who'd been unfairly targeted by a vindictive homeowner. But under cross-examination by the prosecutor, she became defensive and angry, at one point saying I'd undermined years of hard work maintaining neighborhood standards, and that I deserved what I got. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: criminal trespassing, vandalism, harassment, and violation of a restraining order. The sentencing hearing was a month later. Sharon's attorney presented letters from her therapist discussing her mental health treatment and her remorse for her actions. Lindsay testified about her mother's state of mind and her commitment to continued therapy. The prosecutor recommended significant jail time given the premeditated nature of the crimes and the violation of the restraining order. I was asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, and I agreed. Standing at the podium, looking at Sharon sitting at the defense table with her head bowed, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger, certainly, at what she'd put me through, but also something like pity for how completely she'd self-destructed. "Your Honor," I said, "what Sharon Grayson did to me was wrong. She vandalized my property, she harassed me, and she made me feel unsafe in my own home. The costs, both financial and emotional, have been significant. I've had to install security systems, repair my vehicle, and live with constant anxiety about what she might do next. But I also think about how this all started with a dispute over alleged dog waste violations. In any healthy community, that would have been resolved with a conversation, maybe a warning. Instead, it escalated into criminal behavior because Sharon couldn't separate her role as HOA president from her personal identity. She couldn't accept being wrong or losing control. I don't know what the right sentence is here. I want accountability. I want assurance that this won't happen again. But I also think Sharon needs help more than she needs punishment. She needs to understand why she became so obsessed with controlling the neighborhood that she was willing to commit crimes. She needs to rebuild her life without defining herself by power over others. So I'll leave the sentencing to your discretion, Your Honor. But I hope whatever you decide includes mandatory mental health treatment, because without that, I don't think anything will really change." The judge thanked me and took a moment to review his notes. Then he looked at Sharon directly. "Miss Grayson, your crimes were not impulsive acts. They were premeditated, repeated, and escalating. You had multiple opportunities to stop, and you chose not to. You violated a court order designed to protect Mr. Jenkins. These are serious offenses that warrant serious consequences. However, I also recognize that this case is rooted in a broader pattern of behavior related to your role in the homeowners association. Your actions suggest someone who lost perspective and allowed a volunteer position to become an unhealthy obsession. I'm sentencing you to 2 years in prison, suspended to 1 year of jail time with work release eligibility after 6 months, followed by 2 years of probation. As conditions of your probation, you will complete 200 hours of community service. You will continue mental health treatment with quarterly reports to your probation officer. And you are prohibited from serving in any homeowners association leadership role. The restraining order protecting Mr. Jenkins will remain in effect for 5 years. If you violate any terms of your probation, you will serve the full 2-year sentence." Sharon's shoulders shook, and I realized she was crying. Lindsay, sitting in the gallery, put her face in her hands. It was over. I walked out of the courthouse into bright summer sunshine. Max was at home with a dog sitter, probably napping on his favorite spot on the living room rug. My house was secure, my property was protected, and Sharon Grayson would be serving time for what she'd done. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal over the following months. Robert Chen ran for HOA president in a special election, and won. His approach was drastically different from Sharon's, focused on collaboration rather than enforcement, on building community rather than wielding power. Fines were reserved for serious, repeated violations, not minor aesthetic disagreements. The neighborhood actually started to feel like a community rather than a dictatorship. I continued to serve on the bylaws review committee. We made significant changes to prevent future abuses, limiting fine amounts, requiring board consensus for enforcement actions, establishing an independent appeals process, implementing term limits for board members, and mandating annual audits of HOA finances. Sharon served 8 months before being released on work release. I never saw her again. Her attorney communicated that she'd moved to Wisconsin to live with a sister, making a fresh start away from the neighborhood where everything had gone wrong. Her ex-husband, Greg, still lived 3 houses down. He'd apologized to me shortly after the trial, explaining that he'd been oblivious to the extent of Sharon's obsession until it was too late. "I was traveling a lot for work," he'd said. "I missed the warning signs. I should have paid more attention." "It's not your fault," I'd told him. "Adults make their own choices." On a crisp October morning, almost a year after Sharon had first knocked on my door with her manila folder, I was out front raking leaves with Max supervising from the porch. Bill Henderson walked by with his newspaper and waved. "Beautiful morning," he called. "Sure is," I agreed. "Hey, you coming to the neighborhood potluck next week? Robert's organizing it. Wouldn't miss it." Bill grinned. "Good deal. Thanks again for everything you did, Warren." Taking on Sharon like that, not many people would have stood up to her. "I just didn't want to pay $850 in bogus fines," I said with a laugh. "Well, the whole neighborhood owes you. Place is a lot better now." As Bill continued his walk, I looked around at the quiet street, the well-maintained houses, the neighbors who actually waved and smiled now instead of hurrying inside to avoid notice. Max barked happily at a squirrel, his tail wagging. It had been a hell of a journey from a dispute over dog waste under snow to criminal trials and HOA reform. But standing there in my front yard on that October morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, like I actually belonged in this neighborhood. Not as someone living under Sharon Grayson's authoritarian rule, but as part of a real community where people looked out for each other, and disagreements didn't escalate into criminal harassment. I finished raking the leaves and went inside to make myself some lunch. Max followed, ever hopeful that lunch might include something for him. I scratched behind his ears and gave him a treat. "You know what, buddy," I said. "I think things are going to be just fine." And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. The story could have ended there, with justice served and life returning to normal. But there was one final chapter that brought everything full circle in a way I never expected. It was the following spring, almost exactly a year since Sharon's sentencing, when I received a letter in the mail. The return address was from Wisconsin, from the town where Sharon had moved. I almost threw it away, assuming it was some kind of attempt at contact that would violate the restraining order, but something made me open it. Inside was a check for $3,000 and a handwritten note. "Mr. Jenkins," it read. "I know this letter may be unwelcome, and I apologize if it causes you any distress. My attorney has assured me that a single written apology does not violate the restraining order, but if I'm wrong, I'll accept the consequences. I owe you an apology that goes far beyond words. What I did to you was inexcusable, and I've spent the past year in therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of such behavior. I won't burden you with excuses or explanations. Nothing justifies vandalizing your property or harassing you. The enclosed check represents reimbursement for your tires, your security system installation, and other expenses I caused. It's not enough to repair the damage I did to your sense of safety and peace, but it's what I can offer financially. I'm working at a library here in Wisconsin. I live in a small apartment with Precious, and I'm rebuilding my life without homeowners associations or positions of authority. My therapist says I used the HOA presidency to fill voids in my life, to feel important, to feel needed, to have control when other aspects of my life felt chaotic. When you challenged that, I perceived it as a threat to my entire identity, and I responded in increasingly destructive ways. None of this is your fault. You did exactly what you should have done, stood up for yourself and demanded fair treatment. I should have heard you. Instead, I declared war. I hope you and Max are well. I hope Meadowbrook Hills has become the community it should have been all along. And I hope someday You can think of me as someone who made terrible mistakes but learned from them, rather than simply as the person who made your life hell for those awful months. I won't contact you again. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry for everything. Sharon Grayson. I read the letter twice, standing in my driveway with the spring sun warm on my face. Max was sniffing around the lawn, enjoying the weather. I thought about everything that had happened, the whole bizarre saga that had started with accusations about dog waste under snow. I thought about Sharon's daughter, Lindsay, saying her mother needed help more than punishment. I thought about my own victim impact statement, talking about the importance of understanding and changing behavior. And I thought about the person who'd written this letter, someone who seemed genuinely different from the woman who'd stood at my door with that manila folder of accusations. I couldn't know if Sharon's remorse was real or lasting. I'd never fully trust her, and I had no desire to have any kind of relationship with her. The restraining order would stay in place for years to come, and that was appropriate. But I could acknowledge that she'd taken responsibility, that she'd paid restitution, and that she seemed to be trying to become a better person. I deposited the check and used the money to donate to a local mental health organization that offered counseling to people who couldn't afford it. It seemed like the right thing to do, taking something that had come from such a negative place and turning it into something that might help others. That evening, at the monthly HOA meeting which I now attended regularly as a board member myself, Robert Chen asked if there was any new business to discuss. Janet Porter raised her hand. I just want to say that this neighborhood has come a long way in the past year. We're actually friendly again. People talk to each other. The HOA feels like it's here to help rather than to harass. I know we went through a rough patch, but I think we're better for it. There was a murmur of agreement around the room. Bill Henderson added, I think we learned some important lessons about the balance between maintaining standards and respecting each other. We needed rules, sure, but we also needed common sense and compassion. We lost that for a while, but we've got it back now. Robert nodded. I appreciate that, Bill. And I think it's important to remember that we're all volunteers here. None of us are perfect, and we're all going to make mistakes. The key is to stay humble, listen to concerns, and remember that we serve the community, not the other way around. As I walked home after the meeting, Max trotting beside me on his leash, I reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, I'd been fighting for the basic right to defend myself against unjust accusations. Now, I was part of the leadership working to make sure no one else had to go through what I'd experienced. The neighborhood looked beautiful in the spring evening light. Flowers were blooming in yards, trees were leafing out, and the sound of kids playing drifted from a nearby backyard. This was what a community was supposed to be: people living together, supporting each other, resolving conflicts with respect and fairness rather than power plays and petty tyranny. When we got home, I let Max off his leash in the backyard and watched him run around, chasing imaginary rabbits and barking at birds. He'd been the innocent catalyst for all of this drama, completely unaware that his bathroom habits had sparked a neighborhood revolution. You caused quite a stir, buddy, I told him. He just wagged his tail and brought me his favorite tennis ball. I threw the ball and watched him race after it, and I thought about justice and redemption, about power and accountability, about communities and what makes them work or fall apart. I thought about Sharon, working at a library in Wisconsin, trying to build a new life. I thought about Lindsay, who'd had the courage to stand up to her mother even when it was hard. I thought about all my neighbors who'd found their voices and demanded better. And I thought about myself, just a regular guy who'd refused to pay unfair fines and ended up changing an entire neighborhood's dynamic. Sometimes standing up for what's right leads to consequences you never expected. Sometimes doing the right thing is messy and complicated and takes you places you never wanted to go. But in the end, it's worth it. Because real communities are built on foundations of fairness, respect, and the willingness to hold even the powerful accountable. Max brought the ball back and dropped it at my feet, looking up at me expectantly. I threw it again, and he charged after it with pure joy, living completely in the moment, unburdened by the past. Maybe that was the lesson in all of this. Hold people accountable, fight for justice. Work to make things better, but also know when to let go, when to move forward, when to just throw the ball and enjoy a spring evening in your backyard with your dog. I heard my phone buzz with a text. It was Robert Chen. Great meeting tonight. Thanks for all you do for the neighborhood. Beer sometime this week. Absolutely, I typed back. Thursday work. Perfect. See you then. I put my phone away and called Max back inside. We had dinner together, his kibble, my leftover pasta, and then settled on the couch to watch a movie. Max sprawled across my lap, snoring softly, while the TV played something I wasn't really watching. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. No one was prowling around documenting violations. No one was plotting revenge for perceived slights. No one was using positions of authority to terrorize their neighbors. It was just a regular suburban evening, exactly as it should be. And if I'd learned anything from this whole experience, it was that regular was pretty damn good. Regular meant peaceful. Regular meant fair. Regular meant coming home to your house without worrying about what fresh harassment might be waiting. The journey from that February morning when Sharon knocked on my door to this quiet spring evening had been longer and stranger than I ever could have imagined. It had involved legal battles and criminal trials, neighborhood politics and personal vendettas, security cameras and parking lot confessions. It had cost money and time and more stress than I'd care to repeat. But it had also revealed something important about community, about justice, and about the power of regular people to stand up against petty tyrants. It had shown me that my neighbors were good people who'd been cowed into submission by someone who'd weaponized authority. It had proven that systems, even homeowners' associations, could change when people demanded better. And it had taught me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought not for grand principles, but for simple fairness, like refusing to pay bogus fines for dog waste you didn't leave. Max shifted in his sleep, his paws twitching as he dreamed of chasing squirrels or rabbits or whatever dogs dream about. I scratched behind his ears, and he settled back into peaceful rest. "We did good, buddy," I whispered. "We did real good." And as the evening shadows lengthened and the neighborhood settled into night, I felt genuinely content. The battle was over. Justice had been served. The community was healing and thriving. Sharon was getting the help she needed somewhere else. And I was home, safe and secure, with my dog and my reclaimed peace of mind. Sometimes life throws you into conflicts you never wanted. Sometimes standing up for yourself leads to consequences way beyond what you anticipated. But sometimes, when you fight the right battles the right way, everything works out better than you could have hoped. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in over a year, no longer worried about security alerts or vindictive ex-HOA presidents. Just a man and his dog, in a house in a neighborhood that had finally learned what community really meant. And it all started with a dispute over dog waste under snow and a Karen who couldn't admit she was wrong.